I heard you speaking about diversity. Can you give me an example of that, of what you've seen happen in the last few years?
Oh yeah, I guess I need to raise them to be feminists as well.
You talk to your sons about that?
I do. There's still work to be done, but it's in their best interest.
And if they don't, are you supportive of quotas?
Trudeau uses language that makes him sound fair, progressive and open-minded. However, when we look behind the mask, a much different person surfaces, a person who's the opposite of his persona. In this video, we're gonna scratch beneath the surface and find out what Trudeau's language reveals about his personality and agenda, and why this is important for everyone. Like celebrities, politicians are constantly preoccupied with self-branding. The brand image is how the public actually perceives them, while the brand identity is how the politician wants to be perceived. Oftentimes, there's a huge difference between the two. A politician's interested in scoring high on 3 parameters: familiarity, that people know what the politician stands for; similarity, that people are able to identify themselves with the politician's causes; and more importantly, the words he uses to describe them; and likability, that the politician shows good qualities. This is why politicians talk to ordinary people and participate in normal activities when the cameras are rolling, usually with a big smile on their face, happy because of all the publicity they know they're getting from it. Let's take a closer look at Trudeau's probably most revealing interview. But before we do, if you like the video, click the like button. And if you're interested in the hidden secrets of language, subscribe to the channel for more videos. Welcome aboard.
So, diversity. When I started asking for this interview 2 years ago, it was because I was at a dinner and heard you speaking about diversity.
Right from the beginning, it's important to note that the two of them presuppose a particular meaning of the buzzword diversity. That in order for there to be diversity, people have to look different, have to be born different. Thus, they're both focusing on outer characteristics, and as we'll see, they care much more about people's physical appearance than their inner characteristics, such as talent.
And heard you speaking about a cabinet that was equal men and women. Today it is gender balance, 17 women, 17 men. It was clearly intentional. Why did you do it?
Well, first of all, before you can get to a cabinet that is gender balanced, it took a number of years of work recruiting great women and convincing them to run for politics, which isn't easy as it is. So,
politicians are always interested in coming across as dedicated leaders fighting for what's right. Because they constantly advertise for themselves, we should be skeptical of their language. Here, we should be skeptical of 2 things. 1, the real reason for a photo like this, and 2, a word like convincing. Because who does this benefit? It benefits Trudeau. It makes him look like a frontrunner for social justice. Thus, the verb convince has self-serving motives and detracts from his claim to be fighting for the common good. Later on, this point is made painfully obvious.
But why do it was fundamental to governing well. When you have a broader group of people with different perspectives, with different backgrounds, with different stories, with different life experiences, you're actually much better able to solve different problems.
What Trudeau deliberately doesn't factor in is that people with similar backgrounds or the same innate characteristics can be very different from each other. This goes back to the presupposition in his popularized definition of diversity, that people have to be born different, and essentially then he places greater emphasis on this than qualification. How many better alternatives is he willing to discard because he's preoccupied with people's physical appearance and what their name is? His definition of diversity exposes how he views people as groups rather than as individuals. Each group is expected to behave the same, believe the same, want the same. Groups are easier for politicians and media to upset and control because people have an innate desire to belong to something bigger, a group. Politicians and media bank on that. What Trudeau is deliberately overlooking is that personality is the most important factor when talking about diversity. It's not people's innate characteristics that make things better per se. It's that they, as individuals, possess job-relevant qualities and are talented at what they do, irrespective of their innate characteristics. Who would want to live in a world where essentially you're judged for what you were born as?
I can't control the numbers in Parliament, I can control the numbers in my cabinet. And modeling that leadership of making a determination that yes, it was 2015, we had to do that, was important.
We like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly.
This kind of leadership, which has been popularized throughout the Western world by means of parroting and living in an echo chamber, has an inherent logical inconsistency that needs to be addressed, because why stop there? Why is this the end of diversity? If you want to insist on using the word balance, what about other balances that a person might feel strongly about? Such as a balance between workers who grew up in wealthy communities and workers who grew up in poor communities. According to this inconsistent ideology, people could make all sorts of demands, one more ridiculous than the other, and people like Trudeau wouldn't have a logically consistent reason for saying no, because people would be using his logic, which isn't about logic at all, but about numbers that look good on paper and sound good in interviews. This ideology is by definition insatiable. There's no end goal. It needs to be kept alive, because if it isn't, the privileges will end.
Can you give me an example of that, of what you've seen happen in the last few years because you brought in more women?
Well,
Unsurprisingly, Trudeau doesn't like this question and seeks to evade it. It's unsurprising because he treats the issues that he promotes as slogans and nothing more than that, like the people who overuse the word humanity for self-promotion. Thus, giving specific examples is difficult, and giving specific examples that prove causation rather than just correlation is even more difficult. There are hundreds of independent variables which I'm quite sure he hasn't personally thought about, or at least that he would never disclose.
Well, when we talk about putting a gender lens on issues, where you actually think about the gender implications of it, take a pipeline, for example. You couldn't imagine that putting a gender lens on building a pipeline would actually be meaningful, except if you say, okay, you're building an infrastructure that's going through remote and rural areas, you're going to be descending a whole bunch of mostly male construction workers on it. There are going to be societal impacts in the small communities where they're there. So can you make sure, as you move forward on this decision, that you're building in social supports and a counter to some of the problems that might come up?
He starts with the discourse marker well, which foreshadows modification, modifying the question so that he feels comfortable answering it. Needless to say, politicians do this all the time, but the worst part is that the interviewers who are on their side let them get away with it. For the first 6 seconds he stalls, paraphrasing the interviewer's question needlessly, thus concealing that he doesn't have an immediate answer.
Well, when we talk about putting a gender lens on issues, where you actually think about the gender implications of it,
well, not needlessly in his view, because it buys him more time to come up with something. But what is it that he comes up with? His hypothetical example falls flat because it isn't gender specific. All people could be able to build this social support he talks about, and of their own accord too. They don't need Trudeau to decide for them. Also, using his logic, or lack thereof, the example falls flat, because if Trudeau's numbers ideology were the standard in the town, you could have people who would be more than willing to participate in this social support, but wouldn't be allowed to because of their innate characteristics. So, over and over again, he keeps implying, at the very least, that control matters more to him than people's free will, how people choose to organize themselves. It's interesting that he identifies construction workers as mostly male, without considering the obvious counter-question to this. Shouldn't there also be a balance here? From his standpoint, how can he accept this imbalance? And even better, how can companies that don't have the balance he advocates for be so successful? And why is it that when companies adopt his version of diversity, things often go wrong?
You know, I'm a businesswoman. I had a really clear job to do when I took over Bud Light. What does evolve and elevate mean? It means inclusivity. It means shifting the tone. And representation is at sort of the heart of evolution. Bud Light had been kind of a brand of fratty, kind of out of touch humor. And it was really important that we had another approach. So
recently went to a Saturday Night Live taping. All of a sudden I was like, look, there are no women. It's completely unacceptable. 50% of our executive team are women. And 6 out of 8 of the people in my story group are women.
Are you a feminist?
yes. absolutely. I'm a feminist because a feminist is someone who believes men and women should be equal and who believes that there's a lot more work to do to get there.
The term equal is used deceptively by a lot of politicians and celebrities today, because what Trudeau advocates for isn't equality of opportunity, that everybody has the exact same chance to achieve something. He's advocating for equality of outcome, the numbers ideology. Is it equal to say that a person's name and physical appearance are determining factors for their ability to succeed in life? The answer is no, obviously. It's the opposite. But he's trying to make people forget that. Equality is when everyone's free to choose what they want to do, without the risk of being discarded because of how they look or what their name is, without the risk of being treated as a group, which Trudeau wants people to see themselves as, rather than as the individuals they are, with their own distinct opinions, goals, dreams, etc.
But I've been someone who has understood the importance of defending everyone's fair chance to succeed.
It's quite remarkable that he's even able to say this right after he's just underlined that the way people look should prevent them from succeeding in life, which is the inevitable underlying presupposition in what he promotes. Next, Trudeau makes it known to even his greatest fans, in case there are any, just how focused he is on people's innate characteristics. Apparently, he can't get enough of it. The point is not whether or not he believes what he says, many times politicians and celebrities don't, but what the consequences of implementing the ideology he promotes are.
I at one point said to Sophie, my wife, that it was really important to me that we raise our daughter, Ella Grace, to be a feminist. And she said, yes, and your sons, because I have two sons as well. And I said, oh yeah, I guess I need to raise them to be feminists as well, where you can have a world in which our daughters believe they can do anything, but in which our sons also believe that our daughters can do and be anything and will be allies to them. That's really how we have to raise our families.
You talk to your sons about that?
I do, absolutely. And they're 11 and 4, so there's still work to be done, but yes.
In promoting this ideology that we hear influential people promote across the board, so strange how they've all reached the same conclusions. Trudeau has to act like we haven't already had equality of opportunity for decades. In order to justify his political priorities, he has to keep the victim narrative going. This way, when he knows that certain groups of people are going to be negatively affected by one of his decisions, let's say financially affected, he has the perfect excuse, in his mind that is, because it allows him to say, we're doing this for the sake of equality, or even better, if you're against this, you're against equality. People like Trudeau monopolize certain terms before these terms can be used against them, precisely because they know they're doing the opposite of what they say. Because Trudeau thinks of people as groups and not as individuals, he doesn't trust them to make their own decisions. He's there to convince them, whatever he really means by that, I'm not sure I want to know. And when necessary, invent laws to get his will. On a surface level, this type of rhetoric affects men first and foremost. However, this isn't a men's issue at all, and it's not about feeling sorry for men. This rhetoric affects everyone, equally, so to speak. Firstly, it can be damaging to the demographic Trudeau claims to advocate for, as they might end up feeling like failures if they don't have careers, don't become leaders, etc., if they make traditional choices. Secondly, imagine being talented and deserving of a promotion but getting denied because you're not the first in line, but someone who's half as talented and half as committed as you is, simply because they've been waiting longer or are friends with the boss or whatever. It discourages both demographics from doing their best because their efforts could be in vain. But for untalented and immoral people, it's the best idea ever. They get what their colleagues deserve. They reap the benefits of their colleagues' hard work. Could this tell us something about Trudeau? I wonder. Work to be done, he says, which in light of the ideology or discrimination, which it literally is, whether you support it or not, doesn't sound very loving.
You have lost a bit of male support since your election, and what the pollster inferred from that was that there's, quote, a tacit assumption that they, meaning men, are not a priority. That thinking that some have, that sort of, as women rise up, it is man down. What do you make of that?
It's totally unfair for the men to think that. How dare they? I mean, it's not like their prime minister is promoting an ideology which literally discards them if there are too many of them and they're doing too well. Wait, they can be construction workers though, no problem.
What do you make of that?
I can understand worries that people have anytime there's a status quo that is challenged, but what we've seen time and time again is when you have more fairness, more equality, you actually create better prosperity, more opportunity for everyone.
He was specifically asked about men. However, he doesn't say men but people, so that he won't have to specifically answer to men.
I can understand worries that people have.
This makes his answer conveniently unspecific. His obvious internal stress, however, gives him away. His facial expressions change too. Thus, his body language points to said evasion from the question. He can't control that.
Anytime there's a status quo that is challenged.
What he oversimplifies as status quo is how men and women choose to organize themselves in terms of family and career. And he's not just challenging it, which is the deceptive euphemism he uses. He's effectively promoting taking some people's dreams away from them in order to make other people's dreams happen. The system he's promoting makes him the judge of whose dreams should matter more. The word fairness is in direct opposition to this ideology, but of course that doesn't stop him from using it, because if you use terms that make people feel good, it must mean they're also true, right? Because feelings are so consistent and reliable. Finally, it should be noted that he's using effective prosody when he speaks.
When you have more fairness, more equality for everyone.
He applies a low, breathy voice, which makes him sound calm and pleasant, but unfortunately for him, this is in direct contrast to how his body reacts to inconvenient questions.
What do you make of that?
Can
you give me an example of that, of what you've seen happen in the last few years because you brought in more women?
Well, but at the same time, we're not getting the full economic participation or success out of women, and that's lowering our outcomes as a society.
There we have it. That's the real reason for all the nice-sounding talk about opportunities and fairness. As political leader, if all people work, you will get more money. Money is what it's all about, but it's about disguising this intention in causes and virtue signaling. Next, Trudeau unapologetically reveals the scariest aspects of this ideology, as if things weren't scary enough.
Boards. The representation of women on boards, whether it's in the United States or here in Canada, it's abysmal. Women make up 48% of the Canadian workforce, only hold 14% of board seats.
Yet she didn't have a problem with the Canadian Parliament being majority men, but still having a 50-50 balance, to use their term, in Trudeau's cabinet, which according to her logic should also be unfair then, to men.
We are nowhere near 50%. We're nowhere near 40%.
You've introduced a bill, C-25, to increase female representation on boards, to essentially sort of shame corporations into doing it. You nod.
That's exactly it. It's about highlighting what many more corporations are beginning to understand, and many more shareholders and stakeholders across the economy are realizing that.
She used the negative verb shame, but that's no problem for Trudeau. That's exactly it, he says. So, shame is good. In what other areas of society would he like to promote shame? He doesn't tell us because the logical inconsistencies of his ideology don't allow it. He modifies the question to make it about what's allegedly in the company's best interest, because he, like everybody else, knows that this sounds more positive than the word shame. Because as we all know, politicians always know what's best for each individual company. We can't let the trained professionals in the companies make the decisions they see fit. No, Trudeau's the hero that companies never knew they needed. A hero who introduces the verb force in the following.
Sure.
So by forcing a level of transparency and making people actually explicitly say what their plan is to bring more women onto boards, more diversity into their boards, we're going to spur people to actually act and actually realize, as more and more have done, as you've said, it's in their best interest.
So, if people don't see it the way Trudeau does, he's going to make them see it, as any tolerant and open-minded leader in the free world would say. He's doing what ideologues have done throughout history, making discriminating policies and framing them as diversity or other nice-sounding buzzwords. that they use because they know that the words are the opposite of what they're promoting and implementing. Why else say the words? The scary part is that many people actually believe it because they look at all the wrong things. How the ideologue dresses, how he talks, how he smiles, how his visions for the future make them feel. Like the ideologue himself, they focus on outer characteristics rather than what he's actually saying. In this respect, politicians like Trudeau are very much like magicians. They create so much diversion that the audience doesn't focus on what's really going on. However, unlike most or all magicians, what politicians do have real-life consequences. Next, notice Trudeau's continuing unapologetic evasions from the questions. Evasion occurs every time he knows it would look bad if he gave an honest answer, even though in my opinion, I don't know what could make him look worse than he already does.
And if they don't, are you supportive of quotas?
We're looking at different steps, but I think this is going to make a big step. Even over the past 3 years, we've seen a huge transformation in the conversations at events like this Most Powerful Women Summit and elsewhere, where people just get it, that it doesn't just lead to better decisions, to have more representation.
Deceptive leaders gain success because people don't think critically, maybe because they haven't been taught how to think critically, or probably more accurate in most cases, because they ignore the deception as long as the leader can give them what they think they want, which rarely ends up being the case anyway. I'll finish with a digression because all of this reminds me of fraudulent psychic mediums who use simple word tricks to convince people of their supernatural abilities. People, even though they know they're being manipulated and deceived, look past it because what the medium says makes them feel good. As long as people place greater emphasis on feeling good than actual equality, morality, and reality, the world will continue to be deceived. If nothing else, Trudeau is a relevant case study, and there's a lot more to say, but this will have to do for now. What do you think about this interview? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for tuning in.